Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast and welcome to my friend Dan Sipple. How you going, man?
I'm doing well, my friend, and yourself?
Yeah, wonderful. So we're going to be jumping down the mycelial rabbit hole talking about Cordyceps today, the caterpillar fungus. You've been hitting the Cordyceps. I remember you hit me up for a bag a couple of months ago. Have you been getting into it?
I did, mate. I've been rocking it absolutely hardcore. Cordyceps is probably one of the first ones I started with a while ago now. I think back in the market days, and I remember doing some work with bioceuticals, who I'm sure a lot of the listeners are familiar with, who were bringing out a mushroom product at the time. I did a little stint of work there. And going down the Cordyceps rabbit hole is one of the kind of like first medicinal mushrooms that really grabbed me. And mate, I've loved it ever since. It's up there with my favorite mushrooms. So I've been counting down the days to doing this podcast. So I'm excited.
What grabbed you about it in particular? Are there any because obviously you might have like clinical things that grab you, that its usefulness, but more for your own sake, because you got onto it when you weren't necessarily sick. What's like for you personally, what's drawing you to it?
Yeah, good question. I think the thing about Cordyceps for me was at the time when I discovered it, I was still struggling a little bit with some autoimmunity and still had a positive ANA reading, which just stands for anti-nuclear antibody. So being a young, keen naturopathic student, I sort of dived down the rabbit hole of research and tried to work out what from the fungal kingdom and the herbal kingdom pretty much abroad could start to attenuate those antibodies. So in other words, just reduce the autoimmune attack that was starting to try and niggle its head in. And Cordyceps was the one that had the most research behind it. And it was actually the one that my integrative doctor at the time was researching, as it so happened as well. And he was like, we've got a lot of research out of China to say that this can be used in both immunodeficient conditions as well as autoimmune conditions. I don't think you've got much to lose by trying it and high dosing it. And so sure enough, 6 weeks later, I had kind of like a baseline reading of those bloods. I said, let's rock it for 6 weeks. Let's test again and see where we're at. And sure enough, we started seeing those drops down. So that one kind of always really impressed me. And that's the one that I probably would say I tend to use the most clinically as well, particularly for, I guess, autoimmunity across the board, but particularly when those people are really, really tapped out and, in TCM terms, Jing deficient, which again, our listeners, I'm sure, will be pretty schooled with. That to me seems like a really good combo. There's other herbs that you could definitely pair up and do it alongside. Astragalus is one, but Cordyceps above the others, I think, for that specific sort of really, really tapped out immune deficiency, but still got some autoimmunity activity happening at the same time.
Yeah, I remember 2 years ago I went and saw Christopher Hobbs, and we've talked about him quite a bit. For anyone who's listening to the podcast, his book Medicinal Mushrooms should be in your library by now. If not, if you're just hearing me mention it, that's one of the books. If you ask me, hey, what are some books if I want to dive deeper into medicinal mushrooms and Cordyceps and all these mushies, he wrote that in 1986. The way the wave might be breaking on the trendiness, but it was like Cordyceps first comes up in the Divine Farmers Materia Medica, around 200 BC. So it's been millennia. Christopher Hobbs, in a Western sense, and collating all the scientific data, brought it out all right, I'm just going to make sure we've got to do something here. Yeah, there we go. He brought it out in 1986, and he, at that time, had a bunch of data pointing to the fact, and when I saw him 2 years ago, he still had the same opinion that for autoimmunity, that's the one that he'll go to, no matter the condition as well. He's a real, grounded herbalist. He's just if you kind of just flying by the seam of your pants with autoimmunity, Cordyceps is probably the one that I would tell you to be using. And that, and again, of course, that makes sense. And then you go a little bit further. You just went a little bit further in terms of what you're going to be actually looking at. Where it's famed in a tonic herbal sense. You're going to be looking at the kidney Jing. Now, one of the things that always drew me to Cordyceps, despite the fact that its image is one of athleticism, of yang, of producing more sperm. And I'll go over these, as we move through the podcast a little bit. But its key energetic function seems to be the balancing of yin and yang in the body. And so, I focus on tonic herbs, these tonics, that, ideally you're going to be able to like keep in the diet, whether they get on rotation in a sense, long term. And most like real practical physicians will even say cordyceps because it is having that balancing of yin and yang. It's one of those ones, even with people who are a little bit more like clinical or, standoffish towards tonic herbalism will be like, yeah, cordyceps is one that I don't mind seeing people take long term, that I take long term. And that's absolute magic. I mean, because that's something that people generally, hit. It's something people can feel. I'm bringing too much yin into my body, too many yin practices, too much accumulating and gathering of energy within stillness. Or you can feel like if you're just hitting nonstop deer antler and eucombia bark, or especially deer antler, eucombia bark, not so much. People can often, their mentality can go, God, maybe I'm hitting the yang a little bit too hard. They're not integrating their, they're not integrating their testosterone. They're not having creative outlets to use that testosterone. It's all giving a bit of a bottle cap. So it's too much outward energy, too much growing energy. But cordyceps is bringing that balancing while also, kind of leaning over towards that beautiful stuff that we want from the Yang Jing tonics, like strengthening the lower back, strengthening the knees, the hips, the sexual potency for women, fertility, absolutely, but for men, and building those sperm reservoirs. It's such a bloody incredible mushy. That's kind of why I started using it, was more for that kidney tonification. To make it's a beautiful Jing tonic, but it's a bridge between the yin and the yang. And what I like as well is it's such a specialist at Jing, but it's such a specialist chi tonic as well. So I can really feel that bridge between Jing and Qi when I'm taking cordyceps. What it's doing for the lung. You're just looking at Was in our warehouse had like hectic. I think you've met Was, maybe not. Maybe you just heard spoken about him. But he had like his asthma was kind of managed, but still present, and he kind of just attributed it to his like pretty much just completely wiping out any symptoms or flare-ups of asthma to cordyceps and astragalus, combination. And, especially because, he's probably like, and that tells you there's probably a bit of like a phlegmy kind of indication, and that phlegminess was like giving rise to his flare-ups. And because cordyceps, it's tonifying, massively tonifying lung pulmonary function. But in clinical sense, I'll probably just cover all my points here, Dan, and then you can have your your run. Sorry for waffling. Clinically, if someone's emaciated and has a Jing deficiency, they'll use it. But in a real kind of practical Western sense, I think the removal of phlegm, and like an excess of phlegm conditions, like slightly as an expectorant, but not completely. It's just cutting through that phlegm, especially on an immunological level. And actually stopping bleeding as well. I just kind of like was going through a veterinary book, and they'll use cordyceps to stop internal bleeding and superficial bleeding as well in their animals. I mean, I'm so in love with this herb. I mean, like, I'm not going to go over everything into what we'd be using it clinically for, because we'll go a little bit further. But do you want to have we'll give people some context of what this parasitic mushroom is? Do you want to do you want to just like start us off there and describing what cordy is? I'm happy to jump in at any time as well.
Yeah, definitely. We'd love to. And that's what is super fascinating about this too, is the way it was discovered, all those thousands of years ago up on the Himalayas, at 14,000 feet or whatever it was. And I love that about Chinese medicine too, is that it's always strikes me how humans have encountered some of these herbs in the way that animals have used them first. So we know that with cordyceps, these donkeys or yaks or whatever they were called were being letting up to this particular region of the Himalayas at a certain time of year for feeding and rutting and that sort of thing. And the farmers were noticing that they would feed on these club-like looking head things, projections coming out of the ground. And every season after they do so, their behavior would change in a way that they were more aggressive and more assertive, and they were mating like crazy to the point to where the farmers were like, there's got to be something in what they're consuming.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe next time when we do this expedition, we should load up on on these little cordyceps and see what happens. And sure enough, they noticed increased endurance. All the farmers that would classically go down by the end of the expedition with colds and phlegms and flus and all that sort of stuff were like just blown away by how resilient they were, to the point to where it got through all the villages all the way to the emperor, where the emperor's like, whatever that is, we need it, in the royalty. And by the way, no one's allowed to use it. It's all going to get confiscated. So
always the bloody way, picking on the little man.
Yeah. That's super, super interesting, I think. And it's just one of those herbs that I've really cycled on and off over the years. And sometimes I forget about it. I put it on the back burner, and it's good to cycle herbs, by the way, anyway. But I've never failed to be sort of impressed by how truly adaptogenic that herb is when you've had a good run off it and then you hit it again really hard. And just noticing that Jing return, your output is just so much more maximized. Your ability to pump oxygen around the body, your ability to, your cognition, your ability to do physical work alongside your mental output is just so much more maximized. And unlike a herb like, say, ginseng, for example, when you hit your quota with ginseng, if you've ever done that, Mason. I'm not sure. We've probably not talked about that much in the past, but I know I can definitely hit that point with ginseng where I'm like, enough's enough. I know that it's pushing me too hard.
Yeah,
haven't really hit that with cordyceps. Hey, I don't know about you.
No, well, no. I mean, like what stops me taking cordyceps is I'm like, cool, don't really feel like it anymore. Versus absolutely right. I mean, I love ginseng, but I'm wary of it. I only have it when I travel, just because of it's so good for, like, when I fly. I've made my own tincture, and I've got like a little anti-radiation protocol going on, and that's a part of it. And I just hit ginseng every now and then because I really need that chi. I really need that chi support when I travel. But yeah, cordyceps. Yeah, you know what I feel sometimes, because it's such a beautiful, multi umami sweet flavor. It's one where you can rely on, for me anyway, I can rely on my palate to guide me 100% of the time when it's on and when it's not, because I just smell it sometimes. And when people are like wanting to know, like, oh, which herb do I take when, or should I take cordyceps now? You use, go through all your logical processes of what it does in the body and what you're wanting to achieve, but you can just take off the lid and just have a good smell of that cordyceps. And and quite often, especially when it's like in autumn, or when I've got even in spring, when I'm really just like prepping for like a lot of yang energy, and I want that endurance. I smell and I go, whoa, it smells so good. And I just put a big heap teaspoon in there. And and it was up until, for the last 2 months, I've just been, no, not really. And not yet, not at the moment. And it's just and I love that. And the flavor of cordyceps is absolutely incredible. I mean, I've just been, I've been using in a bunch of recipes lately. I've just been shooting a bunch of recipes, but if everyone's on the Instagram or YouTube, we'll pop them up soon. But it's so versatile. We're going to go through and just describe the palette and the matching, but it's not much that it doesn't match with. And it's almost got like a Vegemite kind of twang to it.
Yeah, I feel that.
You know what I mean? But, look, cordy is a parasitic mushroom. So it's the only one of the mushrooms that we have that isn't a tree mushroom. So we use a cultivated version. I'll explain that. But, the wild Cordyceps sinensis that you were alluding to, been up in the Himalayas, south of Tibet, and then in Sichuan it grows, in that province, Sichuan province, and even Yunnan province in China, in the high mountains. Basically, we'll see the spore of this mushroom inoculate the end of the larvae of a caterpillar, and then from there, during a growing cycle, it will just infiltrate, and then when it comes to summer, it will sprout out of one of the ends of the larvae. And as you were saying, it's got a little club, and that's how it then goes on and shares. And it's in the summer that it does that. In the winter, it's kind of more worm-like, it's down there in the worm, and it's spreading its mycelium that way as well. But that's why in China it's called winter worm, summer grass, right? And so winter worm, summer grass, that's the what they're talking about when they're talking about caterpillar fungus or cordyceps. Now, that industry, it's such an expensive herb. Like, you know, and I think a lot of you have heard us talk about this a lot. It's stupid expensive. It's something like to do if you want, like, we've got like good superannuation, you know, like retirement plans, you know, kitty. That's one thing I'm going to do. I didn't have quite enough coin when I went to China last time, but next time I want to save up a little bit and buy myself some like really badass wild cordyceps and then just like stick that in like a, you know, a good scotch or something like that and let it sit there for like 30 years. And that'll be like a part of my, you know, just have like a part of like my herbal superannuation strategy. But the industry it's attempted to get highly regulated. So a lot of people going and pinching a lot of cordyceps, especially in Bhutan, actually, where you know, there's a certain amount of cordyceps. They have a big festival. A certain amount of the cordyceps harvesting quota of the total gets allocated to different families. I think there's 12 families, and that's their livelihood. And it's a good livelihood because it's such an expensive crop that a lot of people go in and have been stealing farmers, you know, wild cordyceps lot, and it's been having a lot of impact. So, you know, there's a lot of hardship around that industry. So, not a sustainable wild crop. So we had like a choice of like two that we can use, and so what we do, what they've been able to do, and I'll explain it in ours with the one we're using, the CS4. The other one is the Cordyceps militaris. That's an option and on the market, and also very good. But, you know, having access to both, I've chosen CS4. And basically what they'll do is they'll create a big broth, and then they'll add this strain, and the strain is CS4, and it's actually a strain derived from the original wild cordyceps. So it's the CS, Cordyceps sinensis 4, the fourth strain they tried. And that was the one when they put it to clinical testing, that its chemical makeup and its medicinal actions, more so than Cordyceps militaris, that's still good but more unique, was the closest to the wild Cordyceps sinensis, insanely close, in fact. And so what they'll do is they'll put a little strip of that strain, CS4, into this broth, and then let that mycelium, it's a liquid ferment, so it's not been grown on grain or anything like that, but that liquid ferment grow out through the broth and consume all its goodness, and then you're left with this mycelium, and then the broth is drained. You dry the mushroom and you dual extract it, as we normally would. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, or like that's what cordyceps is. I don't think I've really missed anything. I mean, it's quite simple. It's the one thing that's not DDAO. It's the one thing that, you know, but not like getting out there. It's like, but it's too useful not to do it. Yeah, man. So
yeah, totally. It's what we've got, and it's I think they use it's a long word, but the deoxynucleoside, which is just a constituent found in cordyceps called cordycepin. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the one they use. Mason, you might be able to talk more to this, to kind of verify its potency. And the higher, obviously, that particular constituent is, the more medicinal action and the more therapeutic.
Yeah, I think it's one of those mushrooms that's the biological active marker of the cordyceps. It's like, you know how, like, I think maybe you were telling me how, like, with St. John's wort, there's a different active ingredient in like different continents that they attribute all the benefits to, and that's like one of the you know, so there's no agreeance of where the medicinal action's coming from.
Yeah,
with cordyceps, I think it is quite as well as that, you know, that what you're talking to is the adaptogenic element, and then of course the beta glucans and the polysaccharides being the other medicinal actor. But that active ingredient, I mean, and that's one thing that's important to do, and that's what we've got going on every batch. Is I have to check the percentages, but we go against like a modern materia medica, clinical materia medica, in terms of what percentage an active ingredient needs to be at for that to be considered a therapeutically active herb. And so I don't talk about this much, but what we've got going on with every batch and every sourcing is we test to ensure that it's above that percentage, and it quite often is and floors it. But then not focusing completely on that. So we make sure that we know that it's via the eyes of the current pharmacological knowledge, we know that it's it's active. But then don't focus on isolating it, leave the whole herb in a full spectrum extract, because as we know, there's many things that we haven't discovered in Cordyceps and all these other mushrooms that are having massive, beautiful actions long-term on our body. What was that active ingredient again? I got my tongue tied just trying to bring it out.
Cordyceps.
That's right. It's it's a simple one. It's one of the ones that's just like, it's just got it in a blind spot. Cordyceps, and I'll see if I can find that percentage. And so just keep an eye out in the notes, everybody. I'll see if I can find that biologically active percentage that you want to be looking for of that compound. So then we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but let's go a little bit deeper in terms of why you'd be using this mushroom clinically. And I also love just knowing like who what maybe like demographic or stages of development or times of the year, whatever it is that you like to see people on Cordyceps, or you've noticed that you yourself like it.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first and foremost principal reason I'd bring it into the mix would be people, as I said earlier, that do have that inflammatory kind of genotype where they may be expressing some sort of autoimmunity, but at the same time still struggling to regulate immunity. So I tend to see that quite a lot these days, is that people seemingly have this, aggressive immune system attacking them, like sort of the Western understanding tends to put out. At the same time, they tend to be the same people that go down hardcore with flus, colds, sore throats, viruses, chest infections quite often. And see what we see there is classic dysregulation of the helper cells of the immune system and the suppressor cells. For whatever reason, the body just cannot seem to regulate and balance that ratio. So that ratio we want to see in a 1-to-1 ratio. And if you've ever done really advanced immune testing, you'll see that on your blood test. Look at CD4 cells or CD8 cells, which I tend to run often in my clinic as well. But what we're aiming for, as I say, is that 1-to-1 ratio. So you know that the brakes aren't on your immune system. So when you need to fight something, generally you can. At the same time, totally, raging with inflammation and attacking everything known to man. So Cordyceps, to my understanding, is the premier herb for regulating that balance again. And again, that's the one I see way out of whack in almost every person that I tend to test for that's showing me those types of symptoms. And there's actually a really neat study done in 2016 where they were using a standardized extract of Cordyceps, but they recruited a whole heap of people that had thyroid conditions, so Hashimoto's as well as Graves' disease. So for anyone that's listening that doesn't know, Hashimoto's is a hypothyroid condition that has an autoimmune origin, and Graves is kind of the polar opposite. It's autoimmune still, but you're producing too much thyroid hormone.
And so that's also like hypo underactive, hyper overactive, and I think you're kind of pointing to the fact that when you've got hyper, I mean, if you're a lay person and there's, if you've got an overactive thyroid, it makes things generally a little bit trickier, especially in the type of herbs and supplements you're able to add into your system.
Yeah, that's right. That is a little bit tricky. There's definitely some from the Western botanical kingdom that are really therapeutic there. But this particular study was super, super promising. So what they did was they got these two groups of people. They had a control group. They all had the conditions. They all tested positive for these conditions at both ends of the spectrum. And they were all medicated with the mainstream pharmaceutical prescriptions for these conditions, thyroxine, and the name of the hyperthyroid medication always escapes me. But anyway, they gave one of the groups those medications alongside Cordyceps, and they ran it for 5 or 6 weeks, I think it was, or even. And what they noticed at the end of the trial was that the levels of thyroid hormone per se didn't change too much. But what did change was those exact cells I was talking about. So the helper cell and suppressor ratio, which was way out of whack when they started the trial, that was completely normalized by the end of the trial. And what is most striking is the autoantibody levels, meaning how severe the attack was against the thyroid gland in both conditions, hypo and hyper, almost back to normal. And there's not much that does that. So that for me was just super, super reassuring.
That's insane. And okay, so let's then go into, because like quite often I think in Western medicine, the correlation between the, severity of the issue, the marker is the level of hormone that they're producing. Is that right? Is that what they'll test first? Yet
Yeah, so they'll run the hormone levels, T3 and T4.
Yes.
That's what the thyroid gland itself is actively producing. They'll also run TSH, which stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. So that's the pituitary signal down to the thyroid to say, hey, make hormone. And in hypo, that's really, really high because it's screaming at the thyroid saying, make hormone, make hormone. Meanwhile, it's being attacked and it can't make the hormones. Whereas in hyper, the TSH has backed right off because of the thyroid hormones off the Richter.
Yet those levels didn't change, yet the antibody levels decreased in both situations.
Which is more upstream for me, because that's the issue. It's not so much the thyroid gland, it's the autoimmunity against the thyroid gland in both conditions, which is the problem, right? So if you see that attack starting to lessen, that's pretty promising.
And does that also just speak to the hormonal variation that exists in different constitutions?
Yeah, possibly. I know that some people, from my clinical sort of perspective, I think I tend to be more rigged for it based on perhaps their parents and their what they've inherited, what they've sort of been through in their early stages of life has sometimes rigged the immune system to be more flighty and more hyper. And then similarly, some people have been through, trauma and tragedy and lots of stress, and they're more bottomed out and they're more genetically predisposed to it as well. So with autoimmune conditions, we do tend to see quite a strong familial predisposition there as well, but that's not everything. I would say, the classic genes load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. So just because your mum and dad's got something or your brother and your sister doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to manifest it.
Yes. Now, you talked about, I just wanted to kind of throw it in there in case I forget later on, in terms of it being a herb to sharpen the mind. I just wanted to throw that in there. I mean, naturally, if it's going to be balancing yin and yang, energetically kidney and chemically are going to be governing brain function. If you're going to be restoring yin and yang, Jing to the kidneys, you're going to increase yin and yang, Jing to the major organs, and the brain's expression of health is the expression of those major organs. And I definitely find that my mind gets crazy sharp and punchy. Really punchy, and also probably more solid is a good way to put it. And folks, I mean, brain potency. It's interesting how brain potency can be something with so many different shades. Obviously, each person's going to experience it differently. But when you're on a particular herb for a particular time, and you're really feeling the heightened effect that it's giving you, especially if you're on one herb. Cordyceps, I really feel it just pounding in strength to my mental power. And then the kind of the whole point is to take it long enough that I can embody that, and then take other herbs that are going to get my mental acuity going, and then and hopefully embody them and have a well-rounded brain. Now, on bringing sharpness to the brain, please feel to speak to that. But also along with it, I feel it's a good time to bridge in terms of its antiviral effect. And have you got any insights there on in its procurity towards particular viral loads?
Yeah, and anyone who's listened before knows that I'm pretty big on the Epstein-Barr, viral induced conditions that tend to sort of follow that. And again, Cordyceps, there is research to say that it is very, very strong and quite up there with reishi, I would say, in its anti-EBV potential, as in addition to a heap of other viruses that it's been tested in vitro and vivo studies for. So for anyone listening, if they're keen for me to send on these studies, or Mace, maybe we can put them in the show notes.
All right, let's do that.
Yeah, definitely. But that's again why I do love it, because you're knocking out inflammation, you're boosting stamina, libido, and function, and you've got the anti-pathogenic potential there as well. So that trio is really what you want in a herb, and exactly what you said. If you can sort of tune in and to different herbs and just do them on their own. So do a month on astragalus, and then have a little break, and then do a month on cordyceps. It gets hard, I think, so doing a million different things, and you're taking a little bit of everything. Sure,
we talk about this a lot as well. We're sorry to speak over you. I'll let you go jump up, but just even because for you're talking about really going like a solo herb, and I like that. It's very it's kind of what we learned from Sage Apotham, as you know. So, and a lot of the time I say his name, and everyone's like, what the hell did you just say? Sager, S-A-J-A-H, S-A-J-A-H, Potham, I think, Potham. He's a beautiful herbalist. We'll put a link to his work down below. We'll have to get him on the podcast soon. I think we spoke about that, right? Now, just taking one herb, and this is at the point where you're feeling a lot of space with your health and you're not sure where to take your herbal practice. Quite often where you will go, if you feel you have space, you go to just spending time with one herb and really starting to understand its personality, energetics, and effects. If you're not at that point and you're still needing to get yourself back into balance and feeling like you have, you're able to thrive, that's where you might be taking 1, 2, or 3 herbs. And it's like, well, how many is too many? Then too many is when you stop being able to feel your intent with each blend or herb. You can mix 3 blends because they're energetically solo together. But then once you maybe go to the 4th, you go, oh, okay, hang on, what's doing what again? Once you get into that, like, it's ambiguity that you want to pluck away. Any ambiguity in your approach and just throwing as many darts as you can at the board and hoping one sticks, that's when it's time to back off, go a little bit slower so you go faster. So I just wanted to throw that in there, man.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So it's the whole thing of, if you're not feeling it, drop it. If you're not feeling the herbs or you're doing too much, just stop and bring one back in and tune in, and you'll feel it. Trust me, you'll know when it's working for you. And if you can't feel it and you've got to question it and go, oh, is it work? Oh, I can't really feel much. Occasionally, there's the thing where you need to let it build up in the system more, especially if it's early on. But if you've been on something for a while and you're not feeling it, take a break, pick one herb and roll with it and tune in.
Totally agree. Now, in terms of flu, I just want to throw in there, it's something that I know Stephen Buhner talks a lot towards, like back ends of infection. I think especially when the retrovirus starts to really get a little bit of a hold and is proliferating through respiratory cells at quite an alarming rate, or it's moving on to there have been a lot of phlegm. I feel like there's particular instances where he will use Cordyceps, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily one like reishi that I'd just be like, yeah, I think it's cool, like to go at, with colds and flus. I'd like to get your kind of 2 cents. I think, Cordyceps is quite safe, but maybe it takes a little bit more energetic insight into, or the directional insight to what type of cold or flu it's going to be. I mean, it's warm. It's not a hot herb. It's not a cold herb. It's only slightly warm. But in saying that, do you have 2 cents on that?
Yeah, it's a good point, because I'd say the bulk of people I work with, it's more chronic conditions. It's more chronic viral or bacterial issues. So I don't have a whole heap of anecdotal input there specifically. But in saying that, I do have a blend that I use of 4 different mushrooms, Cordyceps being one of them, that I have used and successfully mitigated acute, viral scenarios.
Cool.
I just don't have a lot of clinical experience in that acute stages. But for me, for example, I'm on the tail end of a virus at the moment, and I've been using Cordyceps the whole time. I haven't noticed any worsening. If anything, it's helped me, see my patients every day and keep working through it. So I don't think there's too much. There's definitely cautions with other herbs that you would do in that scenario, ginsengs, astragalus, that sort of thing. I don't think that Cordyceps is anything to be concerned about during acute.
Yeah, great. I mean, most medicinal mushrooms aren't. The way they're working on chi, it's generally going to be different to the way that like astragalus is working on chi. Despite the fact that Cordyceps is working on the lungs, and the way astragalus would be like contraindicated, it would be like it's kind of like pushing your body to like close up the pores and not be able to expel the invading cold. Or just to be kind of like trapping some of the the sick wind or the viral load or whatever it is in, which I think is very situational. Again, I don't like to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there is particular flus where particular stages of the flu where astragalus is better than anything else.
Totally.
And especially at those beginning stages before the cold. The actual cold or the viral cold has really invaded your body and gotten into the cell and hoodwinked. I still think at that point, astragalus is going to be one of your best chi tonics to ramp up immunity in your lung and push that, push it out. But then, on the Cordyceps side of things, we're looking not so much as a herb that's going to close up the pores. It's just going to, with the lungs, expelling a little bit of phlegm, and also increasing blood oxygenation. And this is where we get into the athleticism side. Now, it is known as in Taoism, it's known as as the primary herb for athletes, for going pro at being yourself. And that's, remember in 1996, I think it was at the Atlanta Olympics, and the Chinese.
I think it was 92.
I think it was 92. Yeah, that was Atlanta 92. And the Chinese swimmers got out like ripped. And I don't know whether they actually found out that they were using steroids or what, but they were like, it was cordyceps. They were like, we were just like, and they were actually taking cordyceps.
And they were tested too, and they were clear. It was cordyceps. It was legit cordyceps.
Oh man, they were ripped. They were absolutely ripped. I mean, that's like, I don't know many serious athletes that I work with that haven't had noticeable benefits with cordyceps. And even the short term, like long term is where it's at, as we know. You're going to embody constitutional ability to have greater stamina, greater blood oxygen absorption, and a greater ability clinically, like again and again and again, red blood cell count is shown to be like hugely bolstered by the long-term use of cordyceps. So if you've got that kind of like, that red, that blood deficiency, that red blood cell deficiency, cordyceps is a magic one, as long as with the other classics, like the Hishawus and the Romanias and the deer antlers to help you build that blood, as well as, our favorites like Dongguai, and so on and so forth. But just bringing it back to general athleticism, that's something we can go through greater oxygen absorption, massively supporting mitochondrial ATP conversion. You see a greater efficiencies through the organelles of the cells occurring pretty much across the board when you take cordyceps. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, exactly. And we know that mechanism, which you touched on, it's a great enhancer of something called VO2 max, which essentially helps oxygen move around the body. And I think that in itself is such a big issue I see just with poor circulation. You can be on such good medicines, and such a good diet, but if you're not pushing that around where it needs to go and, tending to the areas of the body that are deficient and are hypoxic, then, it's no good. So something like cordyceps in that sort of area, and then the good old basics, the circulation tonics, like, even ginger. So adding something simple as ginger root tea. Can't beat it.
You can't at winter as well. Like, that's it at the moment, and then you go that's generally what the chi tonics are for. Cordyceps is like it's a kind of a good distinction there, that in order, you need the substance to be able to circulate, which is, the cordyceps is contributing to, and then somewhat begins to, contribute to the lungs and the chi. But then you start bringing in those herbs. Once you have that potential of the Jing, you need to bring the source of movement and movement itself, chi, which is coming from spleen lung function heavily. So that's where your chi tonics like astragalus, to an extent, cordyceps, white atracalotes, cotinopsis, poria, even to an extent, jujube, licorice, they start coming in. And it's more subtle, that you can start bringing the ability for the body to take the potential Jing and then create these little, beginning possibilities of movement in the body, these catalysts for movement everywhere in the body and movement itself. That's your chi. And it's been I've been playing around with a blend specifically for that as well. It's been nice to see, and when, as you said, you just mix in that with something like ginger. People with bad circulation have it, you generally need to build up your Jing, to have your potential, which is cordyceps is a great one there. And then bring in those chi tonics and bring in the gingers and cinnamons, especially in winter. With these chi tonics, you can start with astragalus. You generally, as long as you've got a little bit of movement going on and you're changing your lifestyle, you're generally going to feel like a massive change, as you've just said. And it's great to get the insight of how cordyceps is actually doing that on a dense level. Yep.
Yeah, totally. And I think, it's not like you and I are making this herb out to be like a total cure-all panacea. I think it's still good to, tune in with a practitioner, monitor your bloods and that sort of thing over time. There's always anomalies, but for what we've seen, both you and I, anecdotally, clinically, it's such a supportive herb that I don't think there's anyone who couldn't benefit from it.
Well,
basically.
no, in saying that, I've said it since I first discovered Cordyceps, and looking at its ancient use. I'm excited about athletes getting onto Cordyceps and experiencing greater potential. But to be honest, besides the fact that I have friends that are athletes and I support them, and that I find some sports entertaining, I generally don't give a shit about sports and humans exploring the edges of their potential. I more care about humans having at least a baseline health, so they can then go and explore themselves. Like when it gets like super excessive, like with athleticism, it doesn't excite me so much. I guess that is an exploration for them. But in saying that, what excites me the most about the use of Cordyceps is its use with over 65s. Seriously, I think on a Wednesday or whenever it is, the aged pension gets dropped into the account, they should be dropping a jar of Cordyceps in with them as well. Or like every retirement home, or even to an extent like a rehab center should have. I just think it's a real perfect herb for that. Like of course, astragalus, you could say the same, and eucomia bark, you could say the same, and reishi, you could say the same over 65. But Cordyceps is probably the most fitting herb in the Taoist system that I use anyway. For if you're going to have one, I'd pick that 100%. Jing, supporting of baseline energy and baseline hormones, and and then therefore fortifying the strength of bones and hips and knees. You want that supported 100%. Then your oxygenation of the body, your stamina, your chi, keeping the mind sharp. It's like all the things you need support with as you start getting into the elder years. I don't know what your two, if you want to lay in any other distinctions that you might be useful. Immunity, surface immunity and constitutional immunity.
Totally. Yep. We know hormones drop, if we want to look at it after 30, testosterone starts declining in men. So males listening, Cordyceps, get into it. But certainly in the over 65s, we know hydrochloric acid drops out, white blood cells start dropping, bone marrow starts degrading. I'm sounding pretty harsh and heavy here, but no, you want these allies in when that starts happening to really preserve what you've got and keep that fire burning, keep that Jing ignited, really, because if you look at herbs like astragalus and Cordyceps, that they're working not just on the surface immunity, they do that as well, but they are restoring that deep bone marrow communication to the thymus and to your white blood cells to say, hey, keep going, keep producing. But yeah, that's probably the only part I'd add to it, but you said it perfectly.
Dude, and just in terms of using it, I mean, of course, as we said, it's a pretty well balanced mushy to be using on its own. Of course, I blend it. I've got two formulas in the SuperFeast range where it's a primary ingredient, the Jing and the Mason's mushrooms. What formulations do you find yourself using? Is there any kind of herb partnerships that you like teeing it up with?
Yeah, Cordyceps and reishi, I feel like traditionally paired pretty well, and I feel still clinically relevant together. I feel like reishi is more strictly immunological and a Shen tonic and very calming and very nervous system restorative. Not as much Jing restorative as say Cordyceps. So the two together seem like a really good blend.
Yeah.
Having said that, there's been a lot of cases where I'll be doing, diet, probiotics, liquid tinctures for herbs, for other things, and I'll just do literally Cordyceps on its own as a tonic, just in tea. Like lupus patients, for example, classic example. So we've got a heavy autoimmune process there, and also an immune deficiency. They tend to be the ones that still can't regulate that cellular immunity, that surface immunity. So just straight Cordyceps as a tonic daily, I've seen really good results with too. And there's really good literature on that too. So we'll throw that in the show notes if that's cool. There was one study where they looked at lupus nephritis, so when it attacks the kidneys, and they paired that up with medications to mitigate that inflammatory attack. But what you usually see there from the medication is a massive drop in leukocytes, which are just white blood cells. And in this particular study, Cordyceps used alongside the medication was able to preserve all the white blood cells across the board. Amazing.
Man, the stories are kind of like, we don't share our testimonials really at SuperFeast, but, just because they need context for things like this. But the stories, between Cordyceps, I've had that come to me with Cordyceps, but then Cordyceps and reishi, when you have a white blood cell deficiency, sometimes like the stories, the testimonials that we get coming back of like, you know, folks who have been in and out of the hospital having white blood cell transplants, transplants for like, you know, for months and months, and just like getting towards the end of, you know, their ability to be able to do it, and just depleting immunologically, and then just adding reishi mushroom. You know, it doesn't work every time, but you know, this, you know, so every now and then we get those little like emails from people just going, I just want you to know, this is the only thing I did, and I could feel I wanted it, and my white blood cell count is back up into normal range just from doing that. And same, you know, and there you go, right there, just in that situation using Cordyceps. I mean, it's great. Integration is occurring. It's wonderful to hear that. We're just going to get these little hacks occurring, and then eventually we need to get these things in the hospitals. And if anyone has retirement villages within their family, anyone knows, you know, like, and they have the ability to include mushies, I swear to God, like, I will support like the experimental run of bringing, and I know there's already, you know, it's already a very, let's say, how do I put this tastefully? How do I not? There's a lot of sex there, you know? It's like, you know, there's a lot of people having a lot of sex in retirement homes, and I know this isn't going to help, but hey, you know, that's just like, you know, it's just
people got to get their kick, right?
Yeah, that's one of these things. Like, seriously, I'd love to see Cordyceps little, even if it's just in like, it's in the Tetley tea. Now, that's in saying that, let's bring it into land. But in terms of usage, I mentioned the flavor. In Taoism, it's kind of seen as having a sweet flavor, but you know, with you know, maltiness, little bit of bitterness, not much. Umami, a little bit of a Vegemite twang to it. It's not sourness. You know, how are you using Cordyceps? What are you mixing it in with? How are you integrating it?
To be honest, it's not too tricky and fancy. It's just straight old good, you know, boiling water, teaspoon a day. Often I was doing, most recently I was doing 2 teaspoons a day when I was like smashing out a full day of clinic and then going and doing a lot of physical work. And in the yard, we're renovating at the moment, so we're on the shovel and the crowbar. But I found it fantastic, man. I have to say, like, it was one of those times when I hadn't used it in a long time, and I just thought, let's just rock it on its own and see what happens. I haven't done that in years. And so, really felt it. And I was been looking forward to the podcast ever since, just to talk about these sorts of things.
Yeah, it's an incredible herb. It's like, and I think Ron Teagarden talks about like about 20 years having Cordyceps, and this is anecdotal. I can't find the original source, but I remember talking to people about it, of him having said it, his students letting me know that. But I believe it. You know, it's one of those herbs. It's like so amazing and so deep and rich and contextual in terms of its physical and energetic benefits that, yeah, it would take like about 20 years of ongoing usage to really understand the herb and really unlock the key of what it's going to give you longevity-wise. It's a massive rejuvenating herb. It's a massive longevity herb. And longevity isn't just, we're not talking about necessarily adding years to your life. It's life to your years. That's a rejuvenating tonic. That people need to really wrap their heads around that. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about longevity. And if you happen to have a massively longer life, then that's just a happy accident to you trying to pour in as much quality time, quality tissue, quality hormones, you know, into each day. So you're adding life to those years. I went back and had like a smooth, because it was summer here, and did a recipe video, and, you know, just did a classic like sugar bomb banana with a little bit of maca, good pinch of cinnamon, because I'm generally going to use cinnamon if I'm using something sugary like banana to get my blood sugar balanced. A heap of Cordyceps, and then I just think we went like some kind of tea base, and that was it, and blended that up, and far out, that's delicious. I love Cordyceps in that context. I really like it. I really like it mixed in with chocolate, and I really like it in with like misos, or in stock, or even just like in soups and things as its own stock cube. It's got a really beautiful flavor. In coffee as well, it works magically. And I just wanted to throw that out there in terms of usage. Are there any other final points that you wanted to run through? Just like, contraindication. I haven't really come across many, to be honest. I don't know about yourself.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point because there's always a concern with some of the mushrooms that if people come in that have really heavy inflammatory stuff going on and they're on immune suppressive medications, can you still use mushrooms? If there's any out of the medicinal mushroom camp that I think would be suitable straight off the top of my head, it would be Cordyceps, because we know that an actual constituent from Cordyceps is how they discovered cyclosporin, which is a heavy immune suppressant drug. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it just there's something about Cordyceps that seems to really benefit both polar opposite ends of immunity, and it's extremely normalizing and beneficial so far with the evidence we've seen. Another note just on its fertility and libido enhancing stuff. If there's any women out there where they've they're struggling with fertility or miscarriage and things like that, it can be a great herbal addition to both the female and the male. Remember, this herb on sperm motility as well, and promoting libido and fertility and hormonal regulation. So blokes, if you're listening, and you're feeling off your game and you're feeling a bit flat, go in and try some Cordyceps. You've got nothing to lose.
Yeah, I mean, if you're really bottomed out, like that Cordyceps and deer antler combination, that Cordyceps eucomia deer antler combination, like you get, it's really nice and well-rounded because it's not actually an aphrodisiac. It kind of might as well be, but sometimes you're going to feel it immediately, turn things on. Sometimes you're going to have to build back a little bit. And if you're at that massively depleted stage, you can speed it up a little bit along with the deer antler, but don't miss out on that Cordyceps. It's like a bread and butter of bringing back ejaculatory power. So, bro, thank you so much. I mean, everyone listening, we've talked a lot, and I feel like in a well-rounded sense of what we're doing here. Didn't really get to go into the nuances beyond what you were talking about in regulating in regulation for the immune system, but that's because it's too vast. It's a very potent and magical immune tonic within itself, and you've got an example there. And quite often the outcome is a massive lowering in inflammation or inflammatory markers at least. So, but everyone, some of you just remember, just because a herb is wonderful, if you're not feeling the pull, you don't necessarily have to, take Cordyceps just because it's got all these great things going on. But if you are feeling the pull, jump in there, give it a go, give it a sample. And for those of you that are just getting reminded and you really feel that soul connection to Cordyceps, absolutely go back and get it, bring it into your apothecary. It's a good one to just have there, even if it's just once a week, or maybe it's 7 times a week. Just have it there so that you can continue sparking up that long-term relationship with Cordy. Thanks so much, man.
Pleasure, mate. Look forward to the next one, and hopefully we've shed some new light on this amazing fungus. And anyone listening out there keen to work with me, reach out. I'm more than happy to work with people that might be struggling with any of the issues we've gone over. And
And I want to thank you for that, because lots of SuperFeasters have taken us up on that offer to work with you, and we get the feedback of them having great success. So thanks for helping support the SuperFeast community like that, man.
Pleasure. Appreciate it.
See you, bro.
Bye.